Good morning, party people. Doing another one of the dark morning webcasts since I totally forgot about this. I did that one time and then I forgot to do it again after that. So good morning, party people. I see all kinds of the regulars inside here. Havita Galore, Maulik, Vital Freak, Kurt. Good to see you again too as well. So welcome today. Well, originally I thought I was going to do a live coding, but I ended up fixing. I got up like in my normal god-awful early style. I got up at like 2 a.m. this morning and proceeded to bang through the first responder kit improvements that I needed to make. So I just got done with those and I'm like, okay, screw it. I'll just do an open Q&A webcast. So for any of you who have questions that you want answered over on SQL Server, feel free to put those in over in the chat, and then we'll work through those in a first come, first serve basis. I put them into a queue here over on my console. What did I do with my console? Let me bring that back up. I put it back into a queue over on my console, and then we work through them first come, first serve. Pricewise says, good afternoon from Ireland. So I have this whiskey a day calendar. A whiskey a day calendar that I got from Flaviar, I think it's called. That during Advent, it's like one shot. It's more than like a shot. It's like it's 2 ounces, I think, of whiskey per day. And one of the first ones is an Irish one, so I'm all excited to try. I don't know really much about whiskeys, so I'm really excited to see how that goes. It's kind of neat how they do it. John says, "Good afternoon, Brent. What Black Friday deals will you be taking advantage of today?" So my wife and I, because we're moving to Iceland in early 2021, knock on wood, if everything goes right and my like permits get accepted, we're doing a lot of Black Friday shopping for stuff that we need over in. If we're going to move, I'll give you a great example: pans. We normally wouldn't have bought new pots and pans, but Erica's are old. I'd gotten her a set, I don't know, like 10 years ago. I'd gotten her a set, and so she'd been kind of halfway watching sales on pans, and she's like, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get a new set. So we've been doing that kind of thing. Pillows, towels, things that you wouldn't normally think of going out and buying, but then if they're, on a good discount, then we're like, oh, sure, why don't we do that? And Kurt says, what tequila did you celebrate Thanksgiving with? We didn't. We actually used wine, strangely. We're trying to get through, because you're not allowed to bring liquor or wine into Iceland. So you're not allowed to import it yourself as part of bringing over all your personal goods. So we're working through our booze collection as fast as we can. I think we've got maybe a dozen to half a dozen, probably about a dozen bottles of wine left, 3 bottles of tequila, and then my Advent whiskey a day calendar. Wet Seal says, are you going to sell your current apartment? We rent. We've rented since 2000. I think 2005, 2006, Erica and I built a house together, and in the race up, there was that race up to the recession, like house prices were going insane. On the way up to that, we happened to sell our house before the market bottomed out, and we made a killing on that house. And after the market crash, we were like, you know what? We're never doing that again. We're not going to buy our own house unless we find something that's absolutely perfect, because we do like the flexibility of moving around so much that we end up renting from everywhere. Let me copy paste a couple of the questions over into Twitch so that I can go put them into the queue. And then, because there are a couple of ones in here I can go through and answer. And paste those over there to get them over into the queue, and then put this here, and then let's go answer this one. Anuj says, how do I become a better database administrator? My knowledge has become stagnant for over 4 or 5 years. A friend of mine, Buck Woody, likes to say that, he says, do you have 10 years of experience, or do you have 1 year of experience that you've done 10 times in a row, that you keep doing that exact thing? It's so good that you ask that, because a lot of people don't know that they only have 1 year of experience, and they keep reliving the same year over and over again like it's Groundhog Day. One of the best ways to do that, if your job isn't giving you new challenges, one of the best ways to do that is to answer questions on websites. Whether you choose dba.stackexchange.com or stackoverflow.com or SQLServerCentral.com, pick a place where the public is going to ask you questions and you have to answer them. And it'll really put your experience on a rocket ship. Don't feel like you have to answer everyone's questions, because a lot of people's questions suck. And I'm not talking about y'all. Y'all are fine, but it's not true. Some of you aren't fine. A lot of people ask really crappy questions. Pick and choose the ones that you get excited about and go from there. So that'll help you force, when you go to type out an answer, it'll help you force to yourself that you actually know the thing that you're talking about when you have to explain it to someone else. Then you gain experience by tackling newer and different kinds of questions. All right, next up, let's see here. Let's go copy a couple of things, copy a couple other ones over into there. Elton, copy that from YouTube, paste that into there, and go there. So next up, Lee says from over in YouTube, hey Brent, have you ever been so stressed due to being a DBA that you've considered a career change, even if temporary? I didn't start as a DBA. So I went to high school, and when I was in high school, my parents had a restaurant in Michigan. And so I was around the hotel and restaurant business a little bit. I went to college for a year and a half. I dropped out, and I came back to the hotel and restaurant business. I went to work in hotels and gradually worked my way up through hotels to the point where I was managing hotels. And that was stressful. Like, no matter how high you get in hotels, eventually you're still making beds and omelets because somebody called in sick, or you have an unbelievable rush of clients, customers coming in. So that was really stressing. And I'll give you an example of the extreme case we had on Father's Day. Talk about being a sobering discussion here. On Father's Day, we had a divorced father check himself into our hotel with his student, or I'm thinking training classes, with his child, and shot the child and shot himself inside the hotel room. That's the kind of thing that you run into in hotels that you wouldn't necessarily run into in database administration. Database administration doesn't stress me out that bad compared to what that kind of work was. Is it stressful? Sure, but no one's going to die when at the end of the day based on what I do. Now, granted, some of us are database administrators for hospitals or cancer clinics, things like that, and people will die if you do your job incorrectly. I just haven't had to do that kind of work in a while, so it really helps to keep things in perspective. I like watching Deadliest Catch and shows like Dirty Jobs. I'm like, really, I have a super piece of cake, easy job. Tech support, those people have a really hard job. Albert says, I see around 15 to 20 threads of WinSpid, in which most of them are under suspended state. We only have an 8-core processor. The running SPID query cost was below the cost threshold of parallelism. Okay, so there's really two different questions inside here. The first one is kind of buried in the second part. When a query runs, why would it go parallel if the cost for the query looks like it's lower than the cost threshold for parallelism? What that means is that the cost for the single-threaded query was higher than the cost threshold for parallelism, so then SQL Server decided to divide the work out across multiple threads, and the new parallel query may have dropped below the cost threshold for parallelism. The second part of your query, or the second part of your question, I see around 15 to 20 threads for WinSpid. So when you set max DOP to 8, that's just how many threads one parallel branch of the query can use at a time. If you look through your execution plan, you may see several parallelism icons, particularly in things that can execute at the same time. So you may have one task that uses 8 threads, another task that uses 8 threads, and both execute simultaneously. So it's totally normal to see threads go out and above beyond that. It's a great question. That there aren't a lot of people who have to solve that. You should be happy that you've done that level of investigation, but nothing's wrong. You're actually okay. Next up from YouTube, Elton asks, I've got a heap with million inserts and updates a day, causing missing estimates even with stats updated with a full scan. Most of the plans generated are trivial. Any tips to start troubleshooting? Put a clustered index on it. Put a clustered index on the table, and then you're going to get different execution plans, because all of a sudden now it may not be trivial anymore. SQL Server may have to make different decisions. You could also try putting a non-clustered index on it. That'll also probably pop it up past trivial. This is also the kind of thing that I discuss in my class, Fundamentals of Query Tuning, which just happens to be on sale today. Today I'm running my Black Friday sale. If you go over to brentozar.com/Black Friday, the class that you're interested in is Fundamentals of Query Tuning, and that's where I start to explain trivial execution plans versus fully optimized plans, the differences between those, how you can coach SQL Server to go down one path instead of another, and then how you review those execution plans to make them become better. So that's over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. There are bundles out there, but you can also just buy one individual course at a time as well. All right, let's copy paste a couple of other things inside here and go put these in from YouTube. Let's see here, from YouTube, paste that one in. This one, copy and paste this out of here from YouTube. Paste that into there. Oh, Richie's here. Good to see you, Richie. Let's see here. Copy and paste from YouTube. Paste. And let's see here. Copy this out. From YouTube. And so, folks, too, what you see me doing is you see me copy pasting stuff over into Twitch, because really the one way that we prefer to get questions is over in Twitch, just because that way I can add them directly to the queue. And I think that's, oh, Daniel Hutmacher is here. Oh, very cool. Good to see you, Mr. Hutmacher. And then copy this last one in, and then we'll go start tackling through these. So next up, we have Kapil from YouTube. Whoops, wrong one. Let me switch over to there. Says, or for large tables, what are your views of enabling page compression for non-clustered indexes? So my thing with that is, it's never been the thing, that's never been the solution that got me past the finish line at a client. I've never been in a situation where I said, you know what, all we have to do is enable compression and we're going to be fine. It's been a piece of lots of other solutions, but it's never been the thing where I've gone, this is the one thing that's going to get us done. So, Ozar spamming the chat. So what I would say is, when you're trying to decide whether or not you should add it or enable it, I would normally step back and say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Instead of picking up a hammer and going, where can I use this hammer? Step back and go, what's the thing that I need to build? And then that'll help you answer the question better. Next up, Mr. Greenflake. Mr. Greenflake says, have you ever used control transaction durability, and what kind of scenario? This is another one of those hammer questions. Hey, I got this hammer. Where do I use this hammer? So what I think you're talking about is delayed durability. With delayed durability, the solution, or the thing that solves, is when you have very high write log waits. If your SQL server is constantly waiting to write to the transaction log, you can enable this switch and it considers transactions committed as soon as they come in, which is kind of weird, because also if your SQL server fails over, restarts, crashes, anything like that, you will lose data. So the place where it makes sense is if I've got a staging database for an ETL process, and I can afford to lose data out of it because I'm going to restart the ETL process anyway. If the server fails over, then that's where it starts to make sense. Next up, G. Joe from YouTube. Oh, thanks for everything you share with the SQL Server community. I drove down the motorway 8 years ago, sold as a SQL Server expert. Q Google, and who's this Brent Ozar guy? Great, I'm glad I could help. I know a lot of people run into that same problem where, oh, my little sound effects thing isn't working. Let me go fix that real quick. I know a lot of people run into that problem, especially people who are consultants. People who are consultants who get suddenly assigned to a project and they have to fix things. And so I always hope that they can Google for stuff and find my methodologies. Like I try to put it out there. Here's how you do a health check. Here's how you do a performance health check and things like that. So glad I could help. Next up, Greg says from over on YouTube, do you have any articles that you would recommend for describing Entity Framework Core and SQL Server from a DBA perspective? No, so I've sat in on conferences. I've sat in on conference sessions that talked about Entity Framework Core. So what I would do is I would go to Microsoft Ignite, go to Google for Microsoft Ignite, and you can watch all of the past sessions for free. And over there, you're going to see presenters talking about Entity Framework, not from a DBA perspective, because the market's just so small. There just aren't a lot of people who can describe those two topics from a DBA perspective. What I would say is that there's a hole in the SQL Server market, like in the blog market and the presenting market, for someone who can do that. When I went to Iceland this past January, February, whenever it was, I actually took my laptop and a bunch of books, online books about Entity Framework, because I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go learn Entity Framework as a developer, and I'm going to go compile an application. Meanwhile, Richie's like screaming with laughter. I'm going to compile an application, and then I'm going to be able to translate between these two worlds, in between the development world and the DBA world, and I'm going to do presentations. And I gave up on that pretty quick. I suck at development. I'm not about to get better. I'm old. You know, it's not going to be right up my bag. So if it's something that if you want to go and tackle and learn, there would be a lot of people who would be interested in hearing your sessions. Next up, Ralph says, when is it recommended to divide a data file into file groups? For me, it's a terabyte is when I even start thinking about it. When the database is a terabyte or larger, that's where you sit down and go, okay, so how do we want to do backups and restores? How do we want to lay this out on storage? Are we going to need multiple virtual SCSI adapters if we're dealing with a VM? Things like that. So 1 terabyte is the place where I would start. Oh, that's true. Julie Lerman. That's absolutely true. I don't even remember if that's how you spell her name, but yes, that's a very good point. Julie Lerman's course is on Entity Framework. Next up, Ernesto from Mexico City, if I remember right, says, I heard that someone needed to know what workload in each database do. Can SP Blitz Cache offer any measure that shows it? No, because you have cross-database queries. Because people can join across databases. It's one of those in theory that you could measure it with the plan cache, but in practice, because of cross-database queries, you can't. Plan cache just shows the database where the query originated, which isn't always the database that it's querying. For example, some logins will default to master or tempdb, but then they actually use fully qualified queries to jump across databases. Next up over on YouTube, Bakir asks, my friend asked, I like how you did that there, in log shipping, can we set the secondary database recovery model to simple? No, you can't change the secondary database because it is read-only. That's kind of hidden in your question right there. You can't make any changes to a read-only database. Oh. Next up, Nanesh says, any helpful videos or articles on how to troubleshoot SQL Server memory pressure? I'm getting out of memory errors in SQL Server 2016. So SQL Server doesn't throw out of memory errors. I'm wondering if where you're getting the out of memory error from. Like if you can paste the specific error, as much text as you can in there, and where you found the error. Because SQL Server, I've never seen SQL Server post something like an out of memory error. There are errors that SQL Server throws around memory, but that's not, we wouldn't usually describe it as OOM. All right, let's copy a couple of paste a couple of queries into here because we had a couple of things from YouTube. Just a second here. Kapil had a follow up on his compression question, so I'll add that to the queue and I'll hit that next. Was there any others that I missed? Looks like Greg. Greg, yeah, we'll hit that follow-up too as well. And paste that in there. Welcome to the club, Toon Jamie. So Greg had a follow-up that said, an app developer I'm working with is transitioning from using Entity Framework Core to have everything be dynamic SQL. So are you saying, yeah, I should blog about that? Yes. And I'll tell you this, there's a pot of gold at the end of that rainbow. If you wanted to make a career out of it, there are a ton of developers who would love help understanding why their Entity Framework queries are slow and how to make them go faster. It's not that Entity Framework is bad. I love Entity Framework. I love Hibernate. I love anything that makes it easier for developers to ship products. Companies ain't like, no customers ever paid a DBA for being, oh my goodness, this application's so fast. Let's give a tip to the database administrator. No, customers pay developers for features, and customers expect the developers to make it go fast. But us DBAs, we're just kind of like dead weight. The developers are dragging us along for a good time. So I'm a huge fan of developers using tools like Entity Framework and Hibernate and Dapper to ship features quickly, and they just need help getting those things to perform. The other one that was a follow-up was Kapil said about the non-clustered index compression or the clustered index compression. The problem we're trying to work on is saving space in a growing database. We've tried a few things. This is one of a few that we've not yet tried. What I've always want to set things in perspective with is this is a 128 gig USB thumb drive. I see a lot of folks who go, we're trying to save space, and yet when we look at the databases, it's like 50 gigs or 100 gigs. And I'm like, just go buy more space. It's just not that big of a deal. If you're up in the terabyte or beyond territory, if you're in a terabyte in a single database, then it starts to make sense. And then I see people doing compression. Just don't expect a big bang for the buck from page compression or row compression. If you truly want compression, that's where Columnstore indexes come in. So. Next up, let's see here, a couple of things that have come in. Let's go pop this in. Psybash says, that's kind of a cool icon. When are transaction logs shrunk? They're never shrunk automatically. SQL Server leaves that space available for reuse because you're probably going to need it again. If you start a big transaction, you need enough log space out there to accommodate that, or if you don't take transaction log backups very often. So SQL Server just leaves the file the space that it is. You don't want to shrink it, because if you shrink it, then when it needs to grow back out again, that's a blocking operation. So as people are doing inserts, updates, and deletes, all of a sudden their transaction is frozen while we go deal with growing the file out, and Windows has to write zeros across that entire log file growth. So it's a performance nightmare. Just leave it where it is. And also, people will say, how big should my log file be? I usually tell people you should expect it to be 10 to 20% of the size of the database. That's totally normal. And it'll even grow longer if you have people doing things like frequent large transactions. They're doing begin tran, doing a whole lot of work. Or if they're leaving the transaction open for a long period of time. Or going a long time. For me, a long time is 15 to 30 minutes in between log backups. I don't know what turtle is. I have no clue what that is. Next up, let's see here. Next up, we have VTOL Freak. Good to see you again. Any thoughts on using a really low fill factor? I've got a customer using GUIDs as their primary keys, and they're running 80% to avoid page splits on insert. So for me, if it's like 80% or above, I don't really say anything. And it's funny that you mentioned that. That's the exact number that I use during mastering index tuning. If it's below 80%, I start to have a conversation, and I'm going to say, just to pick a number, let's say a 75, because you could do the same thing at 80, what I'm about to describe. Say it's 75%. I tell people, okay, look, just so you're aware, you're leaving 25% empty space on every page. That means your database just grew 25% larger. Your memory is 25% less effective because every page that you're caching has 25% empty space. Your memory just dropped by 25%. Your backups take 25% longer. Your index rebuilds take 25% longer. Are you sure you want to do that? Do you really know how bad your page splits are? And did you measure before and after? Because a lot of times people will just drop their fill factor and they'll assume that page splits went down, but they didn't actually measure. In which case I'll say, okay, how about we coach this back up a little higher? But seriously, honest to God, like at 80%, I'm like, whatever. If you just grew your database by 20% and your backups took 20% longer and your memory's 20% smaller, that's not that big of a deal. So I try to pick my battles. Next up, Simonaut asks, good to see you again. Simonaut says, is it a mistake? What's the song? It's a mistake. Was that the Police? I'm trying to remember who that was. I don't think that's who it was. Oh, Cybash. So that's a totally different question. If you want to search and talk about log truncation, I'm going to limit it just because I don't want to spend too much time talking about one question. But if you want, go ahead and Google that term, and then you'll be able to learn more about that. So Simonaut says, is it a mistake? It's a mistake to have a dev SQL server with 2 CPUs and a large one with 10 CPUs. I'm suspicious that it's making queries behave differently due to parallelism stuff. It is. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, are your developers really troubleshooting the degrees of parallelism inside their queries? Because that's something that's fairly unusual that I don't see people doing too often. Usually in most shops, they're just happy if the developers focus on like, do the queries compile successfully? Do they return accurate results? Things like that. Men at Work, that's who it was. It's a mistake. Victor says, database design gurus are telling me all tables should have a primary key. I disagree. What do you think? I agree with them. And if you want to learn more about why, I'll show you the book to pick up. If you want to learn more about why, go to Amazon or your favorite reseller and search for Relational Data Modeling SQL Server. There's a book by Lewis Davidson, and there's a brand new version of it that comes out. I have pre-ordered this too as well, because he has a pretty good track record, and I'm curious to see what he's changed. But you can learn more about it over there in his current version of the book. It's several years old, but the basics haven't changed in data modeling in some time. Next up, Emir. Good to see you, Emir. Emir's one of my live class season pass holders. I'm tending towards a practice for using Entity Framework for inserts updates and T-SQL with Dapper for selects. That approach is really liberating. It probably is. I will also say, though, you're smarter than the average bear, because most people have trouble getting one tool to work successfully, let alone get two tools to work successfully. But I'm glad for you, though. That's an awesome tool. I am Nick D. Says, how would you approach storing some extended event data in a table? I wouldn't, actually. By the time that we get to using extended events, I would use Eric Darling's SP human events. Search for SP human events, and Eric Darling has a whole GitHub repo and tutorial videos. That's what I would use, because it's a giant pain in the rear to reinvent that wheel. And he's got a beautifully shaped wheel. It rolls fantastically. I am not jealous of his wheel. I love the fact that he lends his wheel out freely to other people. G. Surgeon from the Netherlands, good to see you. All right, let's see what we got next here. Let me copy paste a few things over into the SQL Pilot's here. Oh, very cool. Let's see. So from YouTube, paste that one in and copy this. And from YouTube, paste that in. And I think that's, one more. Copy that one in. And from YouTube, paste that in, and then throw these into the queue, and off we go. So Harmon says, what is your vision about creating a separate data warehouse for reporting? So this is so tricky. As soon as you say create a data warehouse, you have to get the data, you have to define the current sources of the data, lay out how you're going to move the data over into a data warehouse, design the structure of the tables that you're going to use for reporting, pick a reporting tool, and then you're going to have to go hire people to do all of this. And building a data warehouse tends to be fairly expensive. At the end of that whole entire journey, your users are going to have fast reports, but the data is going to be delayed. And they're going to be like, what the hell? You mean we spent millions of dollars in order to get reports that run instantly, but they show what the business was doing yesterday? No, I want real time. So for most of my clients, just as soon as I talk through that exercise, they're like, well, why don't we just take the $1 million and build faster replicas of production and just directly query production? And usually that's the approach that people who hire me end up taking. The place where data markets or where data warehouses make sense is where you have a whole bunch of different systems with different database backends. You got some stuff in Oracle, some stuff in Postgres, some stuff in SQL Server, some stuff in some proprietary backend database. And then you pull it all into one system for relational reporting. Yeah, except show me, what's the joke about write a MapReduce query? I mean, obviously that's not MapReduce, but trying to get reporting data out of DynamoDB, although I should say, as of this week, DynamoDB supports Particle, which is Amazon's proprietary SQL-ish flavor for reporting, which is kind of cool. Andy's here too. Andy says, I know someone. Andy's a great example. If you want to learn more about data warehousing, check out Andy's Twitch channel. So if you go to twitch.tv/Andy Leonard, or someone will probably post a link inside here. Jedi Mind Gorilla, hey, it's been a while. Been good to see you again. Hope the fishing's going well down there. All right, let's see here. Next up, let's go copy paste a couple of things into the Abinadan. I'm probably butchering your name, but Abinadan, which I like already. Now I want to go practice that because that's a cool name. Can you suggest books on the SQL Server engine? Yes, I can. If you go to brentozar.com/go/books, and I'll say that again because you're writing it down now. brentozar.com/go/books. And I have a whole set of book recommendations for database administrators, developers, performance tuners, you name it. brentozar.com/go/books. SQL Pilot says, in one of your highly recommended classes, I think you mentioned that index usage stats will be wiped out. No, what gets wiped out is missing index recommendations. If you create a new index on a table, Clippy has amnesia. He just instantly goes, I forgot everything about the indexes that I was recommending. So immediately he starts recalculating things again from scratch, which I love. I think is really smart because you wouldn't want the recommendations to stick around because he's going to start reevaluating execution plans from here on out. Next up, let's see here. Salty2468, who do we appreciate, says, hi, and of course he uses the word appreciate because that's how it works. Hi, Brent, I appreciate this might not be right up your street. Upgrading from 2008 R2. Do I need to do anything? No idea. So let me check my watch. This is the year 2020. And I did indeed work with SQL Server 2008, but I was drunk a lot since then, and I don't remember. And I mean, I worked with reporting services back in 2008. I don't remember anything from that. Your best bet's probably going to be to go to either dba.stackexchange or SQLServerCentral.com, and you may be able to find somebody who doesn't get quite as drunk as I am that might be able to remember the answers to that question. I can see why you probably drink a lot too, because that's a tough, crappy job. Contact Administrator, good to see you again, says, I'm having typed XML in a table and XML has multiple columns. Will a selective XML index help if there's a join on that path? I have no idea. This is another one of those things that I did a long time ago and drank a lot since then, and only did it once and immediately went, this sucks butt wind. And it was so much easier for me to add columns to a table or add child tables and then go populate those with a trigger. Just anytime somebody inserted the XML or updated it, that I would then go hit the trigger and have it go populate the relative columns so that it was insanely fast. The person that you would want to check with, I don't know if Greg has training on this or not, but Greg Lowe, L-O-W, out of Australia. I can never remember if he's got an E on the end of his name. But Greg Lowe out of Australia has, I think he's got a class that you can still buy out there on XML indexing. And if not, just Google for Greg Lowe SQL Server and ping him. He may have a link to it that you can buy somewhere. Let's see here. There were a couple. We might be caught up. I think we might be caught up. No, there's one more from Neil Riley. Let me go copy paste this in there. Oh no, there are two. Okay, so let's see here from YouTube. Paste that in, and then this. Copy this in, copy and paste. Tube. Boom. Oh, now a bunch of y'all are typing things in, so give me a second to go copy paste all this stuff in. Paste, and then you, and you, and you, and I wonder why that didn't pull in. Oh, there it is. It's right there. So got that one. Oh, there was one more there. Okay, good. I think we got them all. So Neil says, we had a consultant who came to build an ETL data warehouse solution for us. They had a pattern of using subqueries to get data from other tables instead of a join. Any pros for their way? When someone does something like that, it's usually because they have a library of code that they can rapidly reuse from, that they can rapidly copy paste from, and just helps them deliver the solution easier, and that's how they got across the finish line. So it's probably an ease of development thing. It may also be to reduce problems with returning multiple rows from other tables, because with a join you can get multiple rows. Next up, G Surgeon from the Netherlands says, I need to purge tens of millions of rows from multiple tables. I want to break this into batches. Is there a way to estimate the impact of a delete operation on the transaction log? Sure, go do it on a dev box. One of the cool things about what you're describing is that it doesn't matter what the size of the SQL server is. This is something that's really easy to replicate in development, since, of course, it's the same work on the transaction log, regardless of whether this is a dev box or a production box. You can just restore the database and then go do it. That's exactly what I would do. Next up, Christian says over on YouTube, what's the best way to create a clustered index from a heap table with primary keys? Create clustered index. Create clustered index, just plain old command, create clustered index, and that gets the job done. And I'm not sure if maybe there's some alternatives that I'm missing that you're suggesting, but if you think that there's something else, just go ahead and paste, like, here are the things that I'm trying to decide between, and that'll probably do it. And then one other one, I don't know why WRTKOs didn't show up. Let me go copy paste that one in. From YouTube, paste that in, and then here, and this. WRTKO says, what would be the best practice for index rebuild online on highly concurrent tables when we're using database mirroring? So usually what I end up with in a lot of my clients who are either doing synchronous mirroring or synchronous availability groups is that they have to stop doing index rebuilds, because they generate so much transaction log space and take so long to sync over to the secondary replica. Like, it just slows down the job so badly. So when we say a best practice, I'd say, what's the problem we're trying to solve with index rebuilds? And if it's just fragmentation, then I'd be like, okay, let's dig a little deeper on, what problems we're really trying to solve, because nobody ever comes screaming into me and says, hey, Brent, I've got this terrible problem with fragmentation. I need you to fix this so that my queries go faster. There are a lot of rocket surgeons out there who will say that fragmentation is a really big problem for them, but then when you actually drill down and look at the execution plans, it's just not that big of a deal. Next up, let's see here. Mark says, funny watching Brent be his own moderator today. Yeah, it's true. This is, hard work. Normally, Surly Dev really helps me a ton. Oh, great. Oh, hold on a second. We got a few others. And when I say great, I don't mean that I'm excited about the questions. I'm just saying the questions are good. Jedi Mind Gorilla says, what a cool view. Thanks. Let's copy this out from YouTube. Professor Logic says, what city is this? This is San Diego, California. It's true. It's Richie says, I'd help, but I'm working. So it's funny. I'll go off on a secondary conversation here for a second. So Richie is my employee in the sense that he works at Brent Ozar Unlimited. But folks, if you ever hire an employee, you should be careful about what you have them do, because you don't want them to get pissed off and leave. You don't want them to do things that are unreal. Hey, Richie, could you wash my car? Richie, could you go clean the toilet? So I'm very super protective of Richie, and I don't mind saying this out in public in front of everybody, because I'm like, Richie is my prized, this is my developer, and if anybody screws with my developer, I will kick their rear ends. So I like to protect him. No. He. So it's funny. Like, I don't care, and it's good to see you. I'm an angry gumball, because that's funny. I love your name. But like, I don't care when, and Richie and I've talked about, I don't care when he works. I don't care what hours he works. He can work whenever he wants. Richie is a grown adult. He can manage his own time. He knows what productive is and what productive isn't. So I am also the worst manager in the history of managers. The only kind of people who I can, it's true, it is true, he did work yesterday. The only kind of people I can manage are self-managers, because I suck at motivating people. I don't do like regular meetings or anything. I'm just like, okay, Richie, there's the finish line over there. I'll meet you there. Let's see if we can get there. Whenever we get there together, but that's cool. Next up, let's see here. Copy a couple of things out over into the queue. We got like half a dozen things up into the queue. I'm just going to go put those in, make sure everything's in, paste, And I think that caught me up with everything. All right, cool. So Emir asks, have you ever had a database where int wasn't enough as a primary key, like you ran out of integers? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, many, many, many. Yeah, so big int is, I'm absolutely well acquainted with the pains of changing from integer to big int, which is also why in SP Blitz, that's true. We have that exact problem now in SQL Constant Care. We load something like 2 to 3 billion rows per month in some of the tables, and way more than that in others of the tables. So we've got some where we had to go already to big int in those. Yeah, totally. Chucky J says, any thoughts on bolting a graph database into an existing data warehouse? I'm realizing a couple few aspects of our data would be better represented as a graph. So it's really tough. The problem with graph is reporting on it. Like, you have to make sure that whatever front end you're using for reporting is going to be able to accurately represent that data out in a way that users want to see it. So especially around data warehouses, people are very used to using drag and drop GUI tools. Make sure that the reporting tool that you use can represent graph data well. That's the showstopper that I've seen hit people. Toon says, I've been looking into the possibility of building a rules engine that would allow business users to define their own ETL mapping rules. Does this make sense? Any links or blogs or videos to start me off? Yes, Andy Leonard, especially since you're on Twitch, Andy Leonard has a Twitch channel where he talks about doing that kind of thing. He is also a BIML pro, and BIML script is really designed to do that kind of thing. Me as a data professional, I'm like, all I know is say the words BIML script, and then I just kind of walk away like that's all that I do. Richie's done ETL stuff before in that exact same kind of thing. But BIML script is the tool that I would go to for that, and talk to Andy Leonard on his Twitch channel there. Next up from YouTube, Canadian, Leanne Peterson. I'm pretty sure you're Canadian, because I'm pretty sure I met you at SQL Saturday, one of the Canadian ones. Any gotchas when enabling lock pages in memory and instant file initialization on an AG replica, other than not taking effect until reboot? So I'm not a big fan of lock pages in memory. The reason why, there are two people out in the field who have passionate's the wrong word, but differing opinions on this. Me and Jonathan Cahias of SQL Skills. Cahias wants you to turn on lock pages in memory by default. What lock pages in memory does is it tells SQL Server, allocate all your pages in RAM and don't let go. Well, I've hit situations like a memory leak in a driver where I actually needed SQL Server to let go. And I've run into problems, like he has a blog post on lock pages in memory, and if you read through the comments, he describes a situation where Windows will blue screen going out of memory because SQL Server doesn't let go. That's what I worry about, and that I've had clients hit when they've had memory leaks in other applications. So I'm not a fan of lock pages in memory. I've never hit a situation where I've had to tell customers, I need you to turn that off, except during things like memory leaks. So I'm kind of torn. I don't turn it on myself. I understand why people do. Instant file initialization, no gotchas at all. Totally okay. Just wait until it takes effect on reboot. Next up, we have Tejas asks, I have moderate level techs. We're all moderate level techs around here. All of us, every single one of us. Working on databases. We have trouble deploying plan guides for queries. Could you please give tips? All of us have trouble with plan guides. It's one of those features that works really well in demos, and then it's just really struggling to get right in real life. I don't have a simple guide or tutorial I could point you to. I want to say that Aaron Stellato has a course on it on Pluralsight. That's the place that I would probably start. But other than the books online references, I don't know of anything that I could point you to quickly. I don't know a lot of people who rely on it because it is such a pain in the rear. I'm not saying there's anything broken. If you get it to work, great, good for you. And I've used them myself during emergencies in the past. It's just that I try not to make a habit out of it because it is such a pain in the rear. Next up, we have third normal form. Says, I refresh non-production from production using restore. Now my developers want an option to just refresh the data. I don't have any. That's a tremendously bad idea, because the problem with refreshing the data is that you have to refresh it in order when you have things like foreign keys. You'd have to get the parents, then the children, and so forth. Any updates are a giant pain in the rear. What you're describing is really an ETL process, like an extract and load process, and that's what you'd end up hiring a bunch of people in order to do this. What I would tell your developers is, hey, yo, why are you using the database as source control? You should be able to wipe anything that's in the database and immediately reapply it. How else do you think you're going to go live in production? You got to have your change scripts ready to go into production anyway. So tell them no, it's easy. Yeah, exactly. Let's see here. Let's see. Let me copy a couple of things over into there. G-Surgeon says query store plus forcing of plans. I have a real tough time on that too. Query store can cause some kind of nasty things happening. From YouTube, let me copy paste a few things in. Paste that in and paste this in. And then this, and I think that'll do it. Oh, Bob the Lobster's here. All right, now add these to the queue, and then go through these in order. So, Jedi Mind Gorilla says, I think Joris has dirt on Brent. By now, he has tons, because we have a company chat room, and I am extremely off color. I am, ask anyone who's ever worked with me, I am politically correct when I'm with y'all. I swear a lot out in real life, just in totally and completely in real life. Mr. TCS says, why hasn't Microsoft built a last login field in any of their login DMVs? On a busy server, there just aren't many options to do that ourselves. So, because they kind of trust you to manage security, because you should be able to disable logins you're not using, and you shouldn't be leaving around all kinds of logins that you don't need. And if that's a problem for you, just freaking disable the logins and see who screams, right? This isn't rocket surgery. You're an adult. You can do that. Why do they need to track it for you? Come on. Let's keep track of the last time Mr. TCS brushed his teeth and used toilet paper. Every time, we better get that transactionally consistent. Come on now, suck it up. You're better than that. Brush your teeth. Barris says, how important is the memory clock speed for a SQL Server? Not really. It's not that big of a deal. It's not like the difference between 2600 megahertz and 2933 megahertz is going to be the thing that gets you across the finish line. Generally with SQL Server, because it's expensive, $2,000 a core for standard edition, $7,000 a core for enterprise edition, you just buy the best hardware that you can within your budget. So when you find yourself asking questions like that, usually it's when I see people haven't actually paid for licensing, and I'm like, let's have the conversation about licensing costs first, because then that opens up some eyes. Let's see here. Copy. Richie says I'm not that bad. It's definitely possible. All right, let's copy this out. Got from YouTube and paste. And then paste that over there, and then copy this, and paste. Now, there have been a couple of comments that have or questions that have gone by that aren't really pain related. They're just like curiosity stuff, and I'm going to leave those. I'm going to let those fly. If you want to learn just about a feature, just go ahead and hit Google, and you can learn about the feature. Next up, Daniel says, is Columnstore appropriate for Oltp workloads? Generally, no. The kryptonite for Columnstore indexes is updates. One of the many things that's kryptonite for Columnstore is updates. Updates are effectively performed as a delete, then an insert, and it causes all kinds of problems with the way they store data. You can learn more about that in my class, Fundamentals of Columnstore Indexes, that's on sale today for my annual Black Friday sale. If you want to go over to brentozar.com/Black Friday, I've got a course, Fundamentals of Columnstore Indexing, where I go through and walk you through putting Columnstore indexes on a table where it's not a good fit, and you see why based on the performance issues that we hit. Then we pick a better table where it does make sense, and I walk you through the same kinds of workload exercises on there, and you see why it's so much of a better fit. So that is, if you go over to brentozar.com/SQL/Black Friday, you can go grab my Fundamentals of Columnstore kit. Next up, WRTKO says, me again, if rebuilding indexes causes some issues, would reorg be an appropriate alternative? Remember how I asked you what the problem you were trying to solve was? Oh no, you don't remember that. So I'll say it again really slowly this time. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Maybe that way I play it forwards and backwards, maybe remix it a little bit, but solve problems, don't go pushing random buttons. That may help. Next up, I know, right? Brent speaking whale. The mating song of whales. From YouTube, follow-up to a previous question. It seems like script tasks not showing code is a common across data tools. Is this correct? I didn't use data tools. So when Microsoft kept bringing out SQL Server data tools, they kept randomly changing things about the names, about the platform, about who it was going to be for. It seemed like they just kept flashing squirrels all over the place, and everybody was super distracted, jumping around. So I never really got into that. I was like, call me when you have a strategy. And they changed it again. Like now the new strategy is, oh, wait, Azure Data Studio. So, they keep flashing around. Like, why don't you get things settled down? You need to calm down. I was listening to Taylor Swift this morning. I would wait until they have a little bit of a strategy that stays the same for like 4 or 5 years through 2 or 3 releases before I would rely on those dev tools. It seems like Azure Data Studio is going to have a little bit more legs, but it has challenges now as well. If you'll go to their GitHub issue and look on GitHub repo and issues and go look at it, I use it myself. I use it every day. I love it. I love Azure Data Studio. It's fantastic. 2 thumbs up, but I use it for Postgres work. I don't use it for SQL Server. So there it is. Work W3RK says, what do you prefer? Do you prefer auto-incrementing or unique clustered index or GUIDs for indexing? I prefer automatic identity integers in SQL Server. They're called identities. I would prefer those over unique identifiers, but the time where you need unique identifiers is if you're doing active replication across a couple of data centers. So say that you have 2 or 3 or 16 data centers and they all need to do inserts. You can't rely on just an identity column because there are so many different combinations of who can do inserts at a time. And identities would let you say everybody starts at different numbers and increments at different numbers, but it's a giant pain in the rear when you need to add or drop replicas. So that would be the classic scenario where you need unique identifiers instead. Shane says, any recommendations to capture failed logins or connections? It depends on what you're trying to do it for. If you're doing it for legal purposes, like you need to capture them for your security team, by all means, go get an appliance. Go get one of the security appliances like Imperva or Guardium, because then that way it'll be outside of the DBA's controls. It's legally defensible in court. If you're doing it just out of curiosity, I would actually do it from the app tier. Have the app tier capture when it fails logins or connections, because they're the ones who really need to know and they need to take action on it. But if you're just doing it as a DBA going, hey, who's failing? Then I'm like, I wouldn't go there. Focus on solving a real business pain instead. From YouTube, Descent Gaming asks, I know that you can never have enough backups, but I was wondering if this is a minimum. Full server backup local in NAS, SQL Server backup, drives local. So for me, full server backups are pretty much worthless. If I have some kind of problem where I need to restore the server, then I don't trust the server. It's so easy to rebuild a SQL server from scratch that what you're better off doing is having another SQL server ready to go restore those backups. So it can depend on what kind of emergency you need to face and how quickly you need to recover from that emergency. But what a lot of businesses will say is that at minimum, they need a second standby SQL server continuously restoring the SQL server backups so that way, that's their very first level of redundancy. So that's even beyond what you've got inside there. Let's see here. Let's copy a couple of things inside here. Copy this from YouTube. Copy. Let's see if anything else. I think I got all of them. Nope, there's another one. Let's see here from YouTube. Paste that in. Copy this. And copy this over here from YouTube. And then this last one, get this over here. And paste that in. And then put that in the queue. And then there we go. Next up is Lily says, do you recommend certain learning paths to learn intermediate and advanced SQL for data analysis? Yes, Itzik Ben-Ghan's books. So I'll show you on Amazon. So as long as we're here on Amazon, I'll search for Itzik Ben-Ghan. Itzik's books are phenomenal. So if you use T-SQL Fundamentals is his first one. It sounds easy. It is not. It's massive. It has all kinds of really good stuff inside of there. Hi, Bakar. So that's the place that I would start. Then the second one that I would hit is his T-SQL Querying book. So Fundamentals and then T-SQL Querying. Those two books will carry you through a decade on your learning journey. They're really good. I still learn things every time I pick up one of Itzik's books, which it really has been a while, and I should probably read them more often. All right, coming back over here. And let's see what we got on the next one. Radiance says, what a cool avatar. Says, can an AG sync go async without saying it to the DBA? Yes. So the classic example is if you have, and honest to God, Books Online calls it a glitch. If you have a glitch in networking between the two, you can go into async. Worker thread exhaustion is another classic example, but yes, absolutely. So in order to fix that, what Microsoft recommends that you do is go to, say, SQL Server 2017, which has a minimum commit replicas setting. You can say that the transaction isn't considered committed unless it's been seen on at least, say, 2 or 3 replicas. Friends of mine who work for Microsoft call that the low availability mode, because if you're a couple of your SQL servers fail, then the entire cluster comes down, like even the primary comes down. But if you're dealing with something like a stock market, a hospital, a hedge fund, then you use that minimum commit replica setting to work around that. Sebastian says from over on YouTube, why are you moving to Iceland? So my wife and I went 2 years ago for SQL Saturday Iceland the first time. And I think we spent 10 days or 14 days. And when we did, we're like, oh, we totally need to come back and stay longer. And so then this year we went, and we had originally planned for, I don't remember if it was 2 months or 3 months. I think we planned 2 or 3 months, and we went, oh, we need to come back and stay longer. And as we came back to the US, we realized that the next year is going to suck pretty bad here in the US because we can't manage to figure out how to put a mask on. We here in the country, well, when the war and Brent has to leave, we can't manage to put a mask on. And the next problem is going to be whenever the vaccines come out, all the anti-vaxxers are going to be out. That's right, I remember. All the anti-vaxxers here in the U.S. are going to be out, and they're going to make it terrible for everybody, and more people are going to die, and we're going to have more shutdowns here. I'm like, of all the times to go spend some time in another country, this is probably about as good as it gets. This is about the perfect time to go spend 1, 2, 3 years in another country. And we keep talking about it. My wife and I keep talking about it all the time, trying to make sure that it's the right decision. Right now, we're thinking we're probably going to be over there for 4 years, and we'll see how it goes. Next up, Greg says, what are your feelings on SQL Server triggers that prevent specific users from launching a query window? My usual thing is like that's more of a management problem than a technical problem, and I kind of hate using technical tools to manage a management problem. It works, it's just be careful, because there is an overhead too. Like, I've seen people put huge performance overhead on their server by doing login triggers and not really realizing how much of an overhead they are, because they don't show up very well in things like the plan cache. So just be really careful doing it. Like, it has to be your last resort. It wouldn't be the first resort that I would use. Binu says, can we get parameter values passed to a stored procedure without profiler or extended events through any DMVs? Yes. In SQL Server 2019, in SQL, well, let me show you the blog post to go read. So if you search for SP Blitz Who live query plans, search for SP Blitz Who live query plans. And if you're on SQL Server 2019, this is turned on by default. If you're on 2016 or 2017, you can turn it on with a trace flag. There is an overhead to using that trace flag, but if you want to learn more about it, you can Google for SP Blitz Who live query plans, and I walk you through that. I don't think in that post that I say that it's turned on by default in 2019, but if you are, then it is. All right. So we are going to stop here for a quick bio break. I'm going to take a 5-minute bio break, go refuel my espresso, and then come back and keep going. So just a quick shout out to my sponsor, which is me. If you enjoy my free streams, then you can go buy my training classes over at brentozar.com/Black Friday. That's the thing that keeps me in business right there. So you can buy my level 1 bundle, get you access to a whole ton of recorded classes, and my level 2 bundle gets you access to my live training classes like mastering query tuning, mastering index tuning, mastering parameter sniffing, my new fundamentals of TempDB class. So you can get to those over at brentozar.com/Black Friday, and the sales on that end Monday. So 5-minute bio break. We'll come right back and we'll keep going with your questions. So see you in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. Let's see here. Just because it was there on the screen, Chad says, do you work with many clients that use Veritas Net Backup? Yeah, if you watch, I want to say I covered it on last stream. What happens is generally in larger companies, they tend to separate the backups out to a separate team. Also in very tiny companies, they tend to use a one-size-fits-all backup tool. So that's the kind of tool that they use in those environments. Jared says, this is my first time participating in your live chat. How often do you do this? Just whenever my schedule allows. It depends on whatever time I've got free, so I don't even do it ahead of time. You know, I don't announce them or anything like that. It's just whenever I have a hole in my schedule. Typically, when I do have time, it's usually at 6 a.m. Pacific. So it's weird. I'm one of those streamers who's not really in it to become famous. Like, I have a day job, and I'm totally happy with my regular training class type stuff. But I do this just to kind of give back to people whenever I have time available, and because it's fun, because y'all are also kind of like virtual coworkers in a way. Chaos Matrix says, I have 2 application suppliers claiming that their app can't handle always-on availability groups. The thing is that until recently, availability groups didn't support distributed transactions or cross-database transactions. So if they do insert updates and deletes and they're working a transaction across multiple databases, technically AGs didn't support that until recently. And even now, the way that they support it is they say pick which database that you want to lose data, because in the event of a failover in availability groups, looks like I'm golfing, which I don't know anything about. In a failover in availability groups, the databases aren't guaranteed to be at the same point in time when they fail over. So if you want to learn more about that, go into Books Online on availability groups, search for cross-database transactions, and they give you specific scenarios explaining when databases will lose data. So if their database involves cross-database transactions, that would be why. Next up, Sujith says over on YouTube, any recommended learning paths for SQL internals? So I usually feel like internals is kind of trivial pursuit. People learn it not because they have to, but because they want to. So in that case, I'm like, go find whatever book that you enjoy. Just go Google for SQL Server internals books. And they haven't really changed that much for the core like row store tables in the last 20 years. Now things like Columnstore, in-memory Oltp, what else? Linux, Ruby, or R, Python, all those kinds of internals have changed, but there aren't really any books covering those. So if you're just talking about internals for row store tables, just go pick up any book from the last 20 years. Find one that you like the style of the author, and that'll be more important than anything else. Socket says, I've spent 15 plus years working with SQL Server, but I've never worked with Postgres. Should I go and learn? Do you teach it? I don't teach it just because I use it, and I feel like I wouldn't teach a class on it until I could explain the query optimizer. Because I feel like I'm at the point at SQL Server where I'm comfortable. It's in my warehouse. See, I don't agree. I don't agree. I don't think that that's a great way to learn internals. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. That's not all I'm going to say about that. Are they entertaining presentations? Absolutely. Is it a great way to learn internals? No. Like if you're going to pick up and I need to learn internals for the first time, if you went to that, you'd be utterly overwhelmed and confused. So I don't teach it. If I were you, I would pick up the class called A Curious Moon. A Curious Moon by Rob. I always forget what Rob's last name is. But A Curious Moon will teach you how to get started with Postgres. And it's a lot of fun, really interesting. You'll either love it or you won't. Jareb says, do you enforce referential, Rob Connery, there you go. Do you enforce referential integrity on foreign keys? Assuming non-clustered indexes exist, when do you decide for or against them? Great question, and I teach you that in my mastering index tuning class. It's a little beyond what I could give you a fast 60-second answer for, but I have a whole module on it in my mastering index tuning class. So if you go to brentozar.com/Black Friday, you can buy the recordings of all my mastering classes for $6.95 this week. So enjoy. Next up, Jason, right? Jason Reeves. Where does the J-E come from? Excellent. That's where it comes from, I'm sure. Next up, Darren says, when I'm storing business logic in stored procs, when I have a bad feeling for your business logic if you can't get your sentences straight. What you're saying is, where should I put my business logic at? When you want to put them in SQL Server is when you want a database administrator like me to be able to rapidly change it without redeploying your application. The time to put it in the app code is when you want to have excellent source control and testability. So there's kind of the pros and cons between the two. And I'll tell you a story about when it made sense to have it in stored procedures. I had a client that ran an online store, and all of a sudden the online store became massively popular and they needed to be able to handle way more load. I was able to sit down with them and we rapidly tuned stored procedures very quickly, and we were able to keep their application up and running online without having to recompile and reship a new version of their application. So there it made sense to have it in stored procedures. But that's just one case of when it makes sense. Really, the lack of testability of stored procedures and the lack of easy source control mean that I would rather, in a perfect world, most of the times, I'd rather have it in the application. Next up, Drop Table says, is it a good practice to always add non-clustered indexes on the same columns as foreign keys? I tell people to start there. It's not your finishing line, but it's just your starting line. If you're going to put foreign keys in the database, then you usually have to index to support them, assuming that you want SQL Server to enforce them for you. Plus, usually when people have foreign keys, they end up joining on those columns, so you usually want an index on those anyway. Let's see here. D, good one. I still don't even understand what your question is. So can you do me a solid and ask a question rather than just stating facts? Next up, let's see here. Comment. We'll copy this over here, and from YouTube, paste that in here. And there's that. And then what was the other one? There was another one that just came in. Oh, Michael J. Swart asked over on, oh, hello, sir. I was like, why didn't it show up on Restream? How much, Michael says, let me copy paste it in so that I can get it up on the thing for a long period of time. Hold on a second here. From YouTube. So let's paste this in here and say from over here. So Michael J. Swart asks, I'm so confused because now I want to show something else on my wall here in a second. How much do you value error handling inside stored procs? We don't use too much error handling inside stored procs, and wonder if I'm missing out on something I'm not seeing. Michael, I feel guilty telling you this because I think you're way better at T-SQL than I am, but I'll tell you what, I don't do error handling inside stored procs either. And when you asked that, my first reaction was, I bet he's going to be asking me why I don't teach about error handling in stored procedures. And it's because I suck. The thing that I always point people towards is, of course, Erland's excellent posts on error handling inside stored procedures. I just don't do it at all. Because in my weird role as a consultant, I'm usually called in to put out emergency fires. I'm not called to build new code from scratch. So I don't do a good job at all of error handling, and I never have. So how much value do I put on it? I think it's really cool if someone else do it, but I'll tell you what I put way more value on. The thing that I put way more value on is not visible until I make my green screen go away. If I make my green screen go away, it's a little roll-up green screen. This, Michael, is your drawing of Princess Leia. So, everyone, that is Michael J. Swartz drawing of Princess Leia, and hangs on the wall. And you'd be surprised by how many clients are like, is that, because I usually leave the green screen off when I'm working with clients, and clients will look on a Zoom call and they're like, is that Princess Leia? And I'm like, oh, not only is it Princess Leia, it's Princess Leia as drawn by a person who you probably should have hired to write your T-SQL instead of me. All right, coming back over. Talk about going off on weird tangents. All right, back over here to the question queue. Back over here on the question queue, Utsav says, if everything is the same, is the performance of Azure SQL DB the same as on-premises databases? Big fan. You're welcome. Glad you liked it. No, because with Azure SQL DB, they have limitations on how fast the log file is, for example, and how fast tempdb is. Generally speaking, you can go faster on premises with like a $200 SSD. And I feel guilty if I don't. I always want to hold it up to show it. So I had to eject it first. I have a $200 SSD that I use for backups. You can get these on sale at Amazon for Black Friday for like $100. And this absolutely positively smokes an $80,000 a month Azure SQL DB instance. I mean, like, it's not even close. Now, of course, this doesn't have any redundancy built in. But you could buy 2 of them, or 6 of them, or 10 of them, and then it's going to go even faster, and it's going to have redundancy. So this is why when we say, some people will say, oh, the cloud is just as scalable. No. There are parts of the cloud that are scalable, but Azure SQL DB, Azure SQL DB Hyperscale, and Azure SQL DB Managed Instances, they are really good at a lot of things, but in terms of performance, that is not the case. Am I saying that those are bad systems? Absolutely not. I think that they're the way of the future, and I believe that someday they will absolutely be able to catch up to this $200. I have huge faith. Maybe even next year or two, they'll be able to catch up to this $200 SSD. Of course, they haven't been able to for like 10 years now. Kind of weird how that works out. Next up, let's see here. Let's paste these other things that we saw. Do we have anything else that came in on YouTube? Nope. Oh, I think that's it. Okay, great. Last one, Havitigalur pointed out, by the way, Brent, if it takes some pressure off you and your missus, you can bring booze with your furniture and all. You have to pay the import duties. It doesn't look that way, and I'm going to pull the site so that we can both walk through this. So if I search for Iceland import residence VAT, if I remember right, things that you're allowed to bring in, let me go see if I can find import residence permit, because I was just looking at this. Import restrictions, there we go, Toller. I love the Iceland's custom stuff website. It's just so easy. So import restrictions, if I come down here to prohibitions, it seemed that it was this. You're not allowed to bring anything that was food. And I can't remember if they mentioned alcohol separately. No, but when I emailed in, they were like, yeah, it falls under foodstuffs, and you're not allowed to import it. And I was like, oh, God. All right. So I would love to be wrong, though. Good. I say I would love to be wrong. The only reason I would love to be wrong is we really like one kind of tequila. There's one kind of tequila we absolutely love. Okay, we'll do one other. Okay, all right, so good one. Finally figured out how to ask a question. Woohoo! Paste that in, and then one more, copy and paste. Paste that in, and then here and here. So good one asked, in what cases will a DRAG replica take over the preferred backup role? For example, when failover happens between the replicas. So you get to calculate the priorities of which replicas have priority when. For example, if it's the only replica that's available, if you say you prefer the secondary, then it'll take over then. If one of the secondaries becomes unreachable, becomes way far behind, there are a huge number of scenarios where different replicas will take over the backup role. That's one of the reasons why I actually don't use that technology. It's not AGs. I love AGs. They're wonderful. I don't use the preferred backup role. What I do instead is I drive my own via linked servers to ping if other servers are up, and try catch blocks. Michael was just saying that I don't use error handling, and I actually do right there. But it's up. You can usually do a much better job of tiering where your backups to go, because often what I want in a multi-data center setup is I want copy-only full backups happening in a secondary data center too. I want them, regardless of what's happening in the primary data center, I also want backups over in the secondary, and I explain why in my Fundamentals of Database Administration class. Then the last question that we have, and then I'll go hop out and go downstairs to my coffee shop, which opens now at 7:30, which is kind of awesome. Thasigon says, would you enable Ole automation? No. What are the risks of enabling it? People will start to use it. OLE automation is for when Ole. I always think of it as Ole automation. Who doesn't want to automate Oles? The problem is that people can read and write Excel files on the SQL Server. If you were going to pick the world's most expensive place to read and write Excel, it would be the SQL Server. Like, you just don't want to use CPU cycles for that. Go do it from your desktop. You know, do whatever reading or writing files that you want to do from your desktop rather than having the SQL Server do it. Huge security dangers there that I worry about if people start reading and writing files directly on the SQL Server. All right, so a shout out to this week's sponsor. So this week's sponsor is my training classes. Today is Black Friday, and we're running a Black Friday discount. You can get like 86% off all kinds of stuff inside the store. Discounts range from 50% to 86%. You can even attend all of my classes for the next 2 years straight. So head over to brentozar.com/Black Friday. Vitigalore says, I'm going to PM you about and do the further checks. You know what else I need? And I don't need this from you, but I'm just telling you because I found it was really interesting. So we're trying to figure out whether we're going to buy a car and ship it and all this other kind of stuff. This is a dumb question, and you might know the answer off the top of your head. I know that I know that electric vehicles have no taxes in Iceland. What about hybrids? Like, if you buy a plug-in hybrid, one of the cars that has just a plug-in hybrid, but it still has a gas engine, is that also tax-free in Iceland? I'm not sure. And that's what I keep reading through the lines in the language, trying to figure it out. I think you still have to pay taxes on it, but I'm just trying to figure that out. So we're having this debate about whether or not we buy a Land Rover in the States or whether we buy one over in Iceland. And they don't have plug-in hybrid. They do have a plug-in hybrid, but it's the really expensive model. And I'm like, I don't want a big car. We just want a Defender, like the small, nimble little SUV. All right, so I'm going to bail here, and I will go downstairs and go get myself some lox and bagel, especially since I actually ordered it yesterday. And they weren't open yesterday, but their website was open, and they had even sent an email to the regular customers saying they were going to be open. I was like, what the hell is that all about? I want you to be gone on Thanksgiving, but you took my money on the website. Now I got to go see what's going on with that so I can go get my bagel. So I will see y'all. Okay. See, that's what I thought. So hybrids have reduced, and full EVs are VAT-free to about 7 million. Perfect. That's exactly what I thought too. Because where I was seeing is it looked like it wasn't as bad as gas cars, but it was still better and not as somewhere in between gas cars and EVs, which was kind of cool. All right, so thanks a lot, and I will see y'all later. I will be in here, today's Friday. I'll be in here tomorrow too as well at 6 a.m. They're all good bagels, Brent. Nicely done. Nicely done. I like that quite a bit. They are indeed all good bagels. I don't think I've ever had a bagel that I didn't really like. Even I've had some pretty weird flavored bagels, and I really liked it a lot. But I will be, yes, the plug-in. Oh, I'm glad you said that, because the EU plugs are, of course, going to be different too at the house. Oh, that's tricky. Yeah, definitely. Oh, so now I'm really not going to buy one over here, because that makes so much more sense to go get it over there. All right, but I'll be in tomorrow. I'll be in tomorrow around the same time, around 6 a.m. Pacific. I probably won't do open Q&A tomorrow. I have a couple class things that I'm working on, so I'm probably going to be working on demos or scripts tomorrow. But I will see y'all in here tomorrow. Adios, y'all. Have a good holiday weekend. Go buy lots of fun stuff. I'm really trying not to buy a TV, but there we go.